Buenas tardes catalans.
Good afternoon.
Tenemos
Today,
un segundo encuentro
we're
por
going to
Zoom
speak with
hoy con
Michael
Sfard de
Sfard,
ZMAN EMET, que es este
and
grupo
I'm speaking in
que hemos
representation of
constituido
ZMAN EMET,
unas cuantas personas de Barcelona,
which
entre
is
los
made
cuales
up of
está el
some
Instituto de Estudios
people here
Judíos
in Barcelona, along
con
with the
Natalie
Institute for
Tertés
Jewish
y Josep
Studies,
Mahor, también J. Cole, España,
along
y
with
el Festival de
JCall
Cine Judío de
Spain,
Barcelona,
and
y
the
que después de,
Jewish Film
digamos, de los
Festival of
atentados del 7 de
Barcelona.
octubre, pues, y de la
After
angustia y
the
las
terrorist
preguntas
attacks
que
of
nos
October
formulamos, pues
7th and all the
decidimos
anguish that we experienced,
reunirnos para hacer estos
we
encuentros
decided to
periódicos, que de momento
organize
estamos
some
haciendo por Zoom, esta
periodical
presencialmente.
meeting,
Y este fue
sometimes
nuestro segundo
via
encuentro.
Zoom,
El primero
and
fue
this
con
one
el jefe
um,
Mischewitz
is in
y
Zoom.
el segundo
The
es con
first
el
meeting
abogado y
was with Rabbi
activista de derechos humanos Michael
Stephen
Sfard.
Berkowitz, and the
Y
second
bueno,
one
solo
is
quiero
with the human
agradecer
rights
a Edith
lawyer
y tal
Michael Sfard.
que me sugirió y me puso en
Um,
contacto con, con
but
Michael
Michal
Sfard. Aquí traigo el
suggested
libro en una
we
nueva edición de Edith,
get in touch
Oración y
with him,
Muerte, con un
um,
capítulo
and
sobre la cuestión de
Edith
Gaza y la guerra.
wrote this book with a chapter
Y
on
bueno, pues
Gaza and the war.
él va a tener una exposición de una media hora
And Mr.
aproximadamente
Sfard will
y
speak for about
después
a half
habrá
an
un
hour.
espacio para el
After,
debate, para
there'll
el
be
intercambio de
some
ideas.
space for
En el
uh,
chat hay cuestiones
debate.
técnicas y abro
We have some
directamente pues
technical
paso la
explanations
palabra
in
a Mijal Korej.
uh, in
Así que le doy las gracias a
Spanish,
Daniel Cher
and
que
I'd
está
like to thank
haciendo
the interpreter
la
Daniel Scher
interpretación, la traducción de todo el
uh,
evento del inglés al castellano
uh, from English into
voluntariamente.
Spanish.
Bueno, uno que quería agradecer a Miguel Sfard
Well,
por
first of
venir y
all, I'd
por
like to
dedicarnos
thank
este tiempo.
Michael Sfard for having shared
Eh,
his time with us, and
Ustedes leyeron él, pero es un abogado de derechos humanos en
he is a
Israel
human
muy
rights
conocido, que
lawyer
atiende
in Israel.
presentaciones de
He's quite well
familias,
known.
comunidades palestinas,
He's
activistas
been very
de derechos
active in
humanos de todas las instancias en el
Palestinian
tribunal
families
supremo.
and
Yo
human rights.
me acordé cuando hablamos
I
de
remembered that
invitarlo,
when
de
we
cuando
talked about
cuando
inviting
escuché
him,
su nombre,
when I heard his
que fue
name,
cuando era
which
activista
was
en Bil'in, que
when I
luchaba
was
por
in Berlin,
mover en contra del muro de separación, que bueno,
we
acaba
were
de usarse
protesting against the
20 años, ¿no?
separation wall. That was like 20 years ago.
Y yo creo que es una lucha que nos
And I
impactó
think
hasta el día de hoy,
this
¿no? La
was a
separación.
struggle that
Y me acuerdo
impacted
que
us till
Muhammad
today. I'm
Khatib,
talking
que
about the
era el
separation. And I
dirigente
remember
de
that
ese grupo, me
there
contaba
was one of
orgulloso
the
que Michael
leaders
Sfard
was very
aceptó
proud to say that Michael
presentarlos,
Svard
que estaba muy, muy
was
contento con eso.
had accepted to present
Y me
them.
acuerdo
He
también las
really
preguntas,
liked the
porque
fact, and I
algunos
remember
dijeron
some of the
también de los
questions because
activistas
some,
israelíes, pero
um, so
si ahora usamos el sistema
if we
jurídico
now
de
use
Israel
the
para luchar
Israeli
en
legal
contra del
system
Estado de
to
Israel,
fight
no lo
against the state of
legitimizamos,
Israel,
no es que
we
al
are
final
not
decimos, bueno, esta es una
legitimating it.
democracia,
Is it
todos
not like
pueden
saying this
presentarse
is
enfrente
a
de ella, también los
demo-
palestinos, y al
democracy?
final
Everyone can
terminamos
appear,
utilizando
including
un
the Palestinians.
sistema
And at the end of the
que,
day, we
bueno,
end up
lo
using
conocemos y
a
sabemos sus
system
hechos en el mundo.
that
Entonces,
we
eso
know
me
what
quedó,
the
siempre
facts
me
are
quedó
on
pendiente,
the ground.
pero
I
también me
always
quedó
remembered that,
pendiente el
but
día que, bueno, Sfard y Bil'in lo
but
ganaron en la Corte
I
Suprema.
I remember
Y
that there was
realmente
a triumph in the Supreme Court
y esa
on
felicidad no me la
Berlin,
voy a olvidar
and
nunca.
I'll never forget the moment of
También
happiness
creo
I
que
experienced at
Bil'in,
the
lo digo
time.
personalmente,
I
solo puedo
I
decir,
think
fue
in
un lugar
Berlin,
muy especial, que
I
teníamos
have
todos
to
para
say it was
ganar y
something
que lo hacemos de
very
forma muy
special,
inteligente.
and it was carried
Pero,
out very in a
entonces,
very intelligent
cuando
fashion.
ahora hablamos, antes
And so
de
now,
esta
when
charla,
we
porque
were
hay
talking
muchos
before
temas
we
pendientes hoy
held
en
this
día, ¿no?
conversation,
Estamos
because
después
there's
de
a
dos
lot of open
años muy,
issues,
muy
we're talking at a
importantes
point
en esta
after
historia
2 very important
y con
years
mucho
in
dolor, con
this
muchos
period with a lot
aprendizajes,
of
pero dijimos,
pain and a lot of
pensamos que sí,
learnings.
como ZMAN
But
EMET tiene que
we
ver
thought that
con hablar de
since
dilemas,
ZMAN
¿no?
Emet
Con cosas que,
deals with dealing
con
with dilemmas,
conversaciones que tenemos, no solo con verdades, sino
with
con
our
dilemas que tenemos.
relationships
Entonces, quedamos
with not
que
only with
realmente
truths, but
ahora
with dilemmas. And so
empecemos
now,
a hablar, vamos de una hora o media hora
Sfat
hablando
will
de
spend
ese
half an
conflicto,
hour talking
de
about
ese
that
dilema,
conflict, about that
en palabras,
dilemma.
perdón, que a veces me faltan en castellano, pero realmente cómo
I
es
lack the
esa
words in
decisión de
Spanish, but
lidiar en
how
contra de un
the
sistema
decision
usando
to
su
fight
propio
against the
sistema
system
jurídico.
using
Y
their
después vamos
own
a agregar
legal
una
system.
pregunta más que
And
tenemos
then
respecto
we'll
a
have some
algo de
more
la reforma
questions
judicial y a los 2
regarding
últimos años
the
que
legal
nuestros invitados también
reforms
escriben distintos
and Miguel Sfard writes in various newspapers in Israel, including the Haaretz, and then we'll have some questions and a debate. So now I'll give you the floor and you can start, and thanks on all our behalfs, and thanks for all of you who have come tonight.
Wow, thank you, Michal. This is really exciting. I'm really happy to be with in this event. Both J. Cole and ZMAN EMET, I have a soft spot to those organizations, and it's not the first time that I'm in touch with at least J. Cole. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for attending this. And thank you, Michal, for reminding or mentioning Bil'in. We won the case in Bil'in. And here is where the dilemma starts. Because if we would lose everything, there would be no dilemma. There would be no question whether we should use the system or not. If you have nothing to get from the system, then it's easy. There is no question. The problem is that sometimes we are victorious in the system. So I mentioned this as a starting point. And I'll be clear about what I want to do in this coming 30 minutes. And hopefully in the time we have after those 30 minutes, we can get into other stuff and maybe talk more about what's happening at the moment. But what I want to do in the time that I have, and what I was asked to do, is to share with you the different insights that I have as a lawyer, a human rights lawyer that represents mainly Palestinian communities and Palestinian individuals who are under not only occupation, they're under occupation, they are under an apartheid system. They are being robbed of their property as a matter of policy, not they are being raided and attacked by both settlers and military. They are oppressed. They are stripped of their civil and political rights. They don't have the right to vote or to be elected or to have a voice in the corridors of power where their fate is being decided. And that is not something that lasts for 2 or 3 weeks. We're dealing with decades. We're dealing with generations that were born into this, and some of them unfortunately died without experiencing 1 minute of independence, of freedom. And in this environment, a human rights lawyer is offered by the system, by the oppressing system, by the system that massively violates human rights as a policy and as a practice. It is offered roads or routes to challenge the deeds of the occupation authorities. So should the human rights lawyer go to the court of the occupier, to the court of the oppressor, or shouldn't she or he? So basically, this is the existential dilemma. To litigate or not to litigate. And to exist as a lawyer or not, because as a local lawyer, member of the Israeli bar, this is what I know how to do. I can represent petitioners, claimants in the Israeli justice system. Now, I want to mention a person that is unfortunately no longer with us. Her name is Felicia Langer. Felicia Langer was a lawyer. She was a Holocaust survivor that came to Israel from Germany after most of her family, if not all of her family, were murdered in Nazi death camps. She was a communist, and she joined the Israeli Communist Party, and basically became the first Israeli Jewish lawyer ever to represent Palestinians in the Israeli justice system. Immediately after the occupation of 1967, she began representing Palestinian petitioners. And she basically paved the way to the rest of us. At the beginning, it was mainly a female enterprise. The most famous, most important lawyers that represented Palestinians in times that we didn't even call it human rights lawyering. There was no name for it. It was just political lawyers. It were women mainly. In 1990, 22, 23 years after she began representing Palestinians, she left Israel. She gave an interview to the Washington Post, and she said that she realized that she had become a fig leaf to the oppressing system. And she no longer is ready to do that. And so she unfortunately burnt all her archive, which was not a very clever thing to do. When I wrote later on, years later, when I started my research, I thought it was crazy that she burned her archive. And when I asked her, why did you burn your archive? She said it would cost so much to ship it to Germany. So she went back to Germany. She got a post in a university in Germany, and she went back to Germany, and she never practiced law again in Israel. So that became like a road sign, like a blinking red light for lawyers younger than her, constantly to ask ourselves, do we do more harm than good? Because the number one principle of any humanitarian work is do no harm. And it is difficult for me in 30 minutes, now less, to provide you with my, I've been delving into this after 2 decades, 10 years ago, after 2 decades of, someone shared the screen, so that's not me, I'm just saying. Right.
Okay.
So 10 years ago, after 2 decades of very intensively litigating on behalf of Palestinians in the Israeli court system, I took time off to do some kind of a soul search and to ask myself the exact question that Felicia Langer asked herself. And I wrote a book. It's called The Wall and the Gate. It's a very long book in which I told the story of 5 decades of litigation and tried to take the reader on a journey to collect the insights and try to do the arithmetics. So was it worth it? Was it worth it to go to the Israeli court? And of course, the result is not conclusive. But here are some of the insights that I have. First of all, as a good lawyer, I want to start with defining things. What does it mean to win? How do we define what winning is? When I looked closely into this, I understood that a cause lawyer are lawyers that do not only represent their client. They feel that they have a cause that is in parallel to the interests of their specific client. They want to have a certain change, social change, and they are working on and they are active in trying to secure that social change. And the specific case can be a vehicle to bring that social change. So cause lawyers can be environmental protection lawyers, they can be human rights lawyers, they can be animal rights lawyers. So every social interest or social value that lawyers, that legal activists are acting for, these are cause lawyers. Cause lawyers, unlike regular lawyers, have 2 clients at any given point. They have their specific client who has a specific individual interest, and they have the cause. They have the cause. For example, a policy change. So if I represent a victim of torture, and I want to get a remedy for that victim, I want to get to either have an injunction that would ban and stop and prevent torture against my client, or if already he was a victim of torture practices, I want the state to compensate him or her for that. So that's the interest of that specific client. But at the same time, I want to advance the social change of abolishing torture altogether, to change the policy in a way that there will be no torture in practice in my country. So as you can see, there are always two layers. I have the specific client, and I have the social change that, as an activist, as a legal activist, I'm pursuing. Now, usually these two goals, they are in sync. My client, just like me, wants the policy to change, to be eradicated, to be better. But it's not always like that. Sometimes these two can collide, and sometimes it happens. The reason my book is called The Wall and the Gate is because of a specific incident in which I came to meet two clients of mine who were heads of two villages in the West Bank. And their land was taken. Large portions of their very densely cultivated olive groves were taken by the separation wall that Michal mentioned before. You know, at the beginning of the 2000s, Israel embarked on this huge project of building a separation wall so that Palestinians would not be able to enter Israel. That was the excuse. But the wall did not follow the Green Line, the armistice line of 1949, but rather it invaded the West Bank and grabbed a lot of very important cultivated land of Palestinians. So these two gentlemen that I met were looking above the wall and saw their lands, but they, for 2 years, when I came there, for 2 years, they and their communities could not get there. And I looked at that and I said, look, I think we should go to court and we should demand to move this wall to the Green Line, because, and I explained why I think we have a good legal argument to be made. And then they scratched their heads and they looked at me again. I was much younger, and I'm not sure that I looked someone who can bring about the movement of a wall like that. And they asked, okay, Mr. Sfard, thank you, but how much time would it take to litigate this case? And I said, well, these cases take 2, 3, sometimes 4 years. And then they exchanged glances, and then they said, could you ask the military to install a gate in this wall so that we could, during the harvest, pass and collect our olives? And I was taken aback. I was in shock. I knew that I can get the gate for them easily. In fact, this is what the army wants me to do. They want me to be the middleman that will better the wall for them, that will make it better handled. And I knew that at the beginning, the gate will be open, and then gradually it will close, and gradually there will be no manpower to man it, and so on. And I thought to myself, my clients want a gate, and I want this wall to be completely demolished and moved. And you see, sometimes these two planes, what is the interest of the client who wants tomorrow to cross the wall, and me as an activist who doesn't want to be one of the architects of the route of the wall because I'm against it. So that's an example of this collision. But let's make things even more complicated, because we're talking about two planes, a client and a social change cause, a policy change. But sometimes, not always, cause lawyers have a third plane. And the third plane is, for example, regime change. It's not enough for me that a specific policy will change. As an activist, I want the regime to change because this is an apartheid regime, or because I want the occupation to end. So now we have a formula with 3 variables, not 2. I want my client to get the remedy that he's or she is seeking. I want the policy to change, but I also do not want to contribute to the stability of this evil regime that I want to collapse. That's even more complicated, because sometimes I was thinking to myself, maybe I can make a change in the policy, but will that thing prolong the shelf life of this regime that I see as evil? So that's these issues constantly are being floating in my mind when I take cases. If I get the order that my client wants me to get for him or her, how would it play out in the big scheme of things? Would it contribute to shortening the lifespan of the occupation? So when I realized all of that, I realized another thing, that the question of whether you won or lost as a legal activist is not as simple as asking, was it a legal victory or not? There is a difference between victory and success. Victory is very simple. It's immediate. It's getting a court order that provides a remedy. By the way, it's not that simple and not that immediate. Michal, when we won the Bil'in case, it took 4 years to actually implement it. I remember giving an interview 2 years after winning the Bil'in case, saying that I just realized that winning was the easy part because the state did not implement the court order. We had to twice file contempt of court orders. And by the way, Bil'in, the famous Palestinian village, got tens of thousands of shekels as fines that the court imposed on the state because they didn't move the fence, the wall. Anyway, so victory it is easy to measure victory. It's either you got the remedy or you didn't get the remedy. Success is a much long-term concept, and it asks the question, not did we get the remedy that we asked for in court, but rather it asks what is the extent the litigation we're dealing with advances the social change we're pursuing. What was the effect of that litigation on public discourse, on education, on contributing to the political and moral manifesto? And in that sense, a success in litigation can only be measured sometime after, when we see what were the impacts of that litigation. Some victories ended up in a failure, not success, because there was a boomerang effect against that victory, which created much more bad things than the good it did. And I can give examples to that as well. I mean, there were cases in which human rights lawyers won cases. I'll give you an example. In Israel, there was a famous case, one of the most famous cases of human rights litigation victories, when the court outlawed the discrimination that was practiced by small Jewish communities within Israel, in proper Israel, against Palestinians, citizens of Israel, who wanted to be admitted to these small communities. So it was the practice of screening those who wanted to move into those small communities was outlawed. And that was a big victory, because you no longer could, as a small community, You could no longer ban Palestinian citizens of Israel, families, on moving. What happened? The Knesset changed the law and created something that is worse than the practice that was there. It normalized the discrimination. So victory can lead to success, but it can also lead to failure. And defeat, which is always painful in court, I mean, defeat meaning you didn't get the remedy you were looking for, might lead to failure, but it also might lead to success. There are some glorious defeats that cause the opposite in the long run, because, for example, it created the lifting of masks, okay? You know, and created an energy, counter energy. So when we're looking at the complexity of how to measure the results of litigation, then we see things are more complex than the question of whether we won in court or not. Because if that's the question, most cases by Israeli human rights lawyers on behalf of Palestinians, the vast majority of these cases, when they end up with a ruling, the ruling is dismissing the petition. But if we're asking ourselves what was the long-term effect of these litigations, then we need to ask ourselves what byproducts the litigation has had. And here I want to mention a few frequent positive byproducts that lawyers, strategic lawyers, would always mention if they're asked, so why do you think it was worth litigating this case even though you lost? So, for example, one important byproduct is time. Time. We buy a lot of time when we go to court. Say, for example, that a certain house was issued a demolition order. A whole family is going to be left without a home. And I and I challenge that demolition order in court. And it is almost an automatic practice that if one goes to court, then an interim injunction is issued, temporary injunction is issued, not to carry out, not to execute that demolition order while the case is being deliberated. Of course, because if it will be demolished, then even if the court decides that the demolition order is flawed or illegal, the house is already ruined. Now, in the Israeli court system, that can take a very long time. Very, very long time. And during that time, the house is standing. The olive grove is not uprooted. The person is not being deported. The human rights violation is not carried out. And that time, first of all, is a pure tax lawyers say that a tax that is delayed is a tax that is saved. The more time you get before you need to actually pay the tax, you can use the money and earn more money by doing, money makes money. So not carrying out a human rights violation doesn't make money, but what it does, it allows other forms of resistance to come into play. You heard of Khan el-Ahmar? Have you heard of Susia? These are two famous Palestinian communities who are under threat of transfer, of evacuations, forcible transfers. And in both cases, the litigation challenging the evacuation and demolition orders were lost. the courts in all their instances dismissed the petitions. It is now, there are no barriers now, domestic legal barriers to the government to demolish and deport those two communities. In the case of Khan el-Ahmar, it took 11 years. In the case of Suseh, it took 17 years. During that time was used to do diplomatic advocacy and media advocacy, to get more information, to get people around the world interested in it. When I went to advocacy trips to DC, when DC was a place that worthwhile going to, when there were different administrations there, and I was meeting, heads of Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, a senator, or in Congress. And I was talking about the things that I was coming to talk about. And I was always asked, by the way, what's new about Suseh? Now in DC, where 1 million issues are trying to penetrate that city, million causes, this Bedouin, herding community, small herding community from the end of the world in the desert is something that leaders are talking about. That means that time was well used. So time is an important factor. That's one. Second, information, data. We get a lot of information by going to court. We get a lot of documents when we go to court, because the state has to explain its position and it has to disclose the basis of it. And so my mentor, Avigdor Feldman, who is a famous Israeli civil rights attorney, and I interned with him and worked in his office for several years. He used to say that the most documented war crime ever is the establishment of settlements. It's an open book. We know everything about how they establish settlements, how they grab lands, how they confiscate lands, how they deport, transfer Palestinian communities in order to expand settlements. Why? Because we litigate it constantly. We lose, but we get a lot of information. And if the ICC indeed, and it is very likely that there are arrest warrants ready in the ICC on the issue of settlements and apartheid, that's because we have all this information. So information is an extremely important byproduct. Litigation is also the only place where the state has to present its position and to account for it. The state doesn't, sometimes the government doesn't want to say what its position is. For example, on settler violence. Also, sometimes it can say what it thinks, but it can lie. It can lie to the press. It can lie to the people. But it's more difficult to lie in court. I'm not saying it's impossible. And I think our government lies a lot in court. But it's more complicated to lie in court. There are more risks. So we many times get the position, black and white, of the government, of the executive branch, because we go to court. And that helps us afterwards, again, in other forms of advocacy. In the times when I was litigating many cases to evacuate illegal outposts, unpermitted outposts that were springing on the ground, the government of Israel it was very convenient for the government to say one thing to the world: these are illegal things, these are outlawers who are doing this, and we will evacuate them. And to say the completely opposite internally: these are pioneers and we love them, and so on and so forth. So in court, they had to say, okay, are you with the thieves or are you with the police? What are you? And to account for it, because if the government says, no, this Amona or this Migron outpost is illegal, it's on private Palestinian registered land, and it will have to be removed, then you have to give a timeline, and so on. So this is a very important byproduct, coercing the state to provide its position. And there are many other byproducts. I will just mention one more. Awareness, of course. There is something about court proceedings that makes the public attention easier to get. There is something about it's like a reality game. Someone is going to win and so on. Many times in many trends of violations and harassment of Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, was very difficult to get to the public forum. Only when we went to court, suddenly there was coverage. So courts are also a very good vehicle to raise public awareness. So when you look at all of this, you see that going to court can bring fruits even if you don't win a case. But that's one side of the equation we're asking ourselves in this arithmetic. There is another side, and the other side is what Felicia Langer said. I don't want to be a fig leaf. What does it mean I don't want to be a fig leaf? It suggests that there is a price that we are paying for collaborating and participating and engaging with that system. And what is that price? Well, later on in that Washington Post interview, Felicia Langer explained that she realized that she's legitimizing the system by going to the system. That people around the world, now I'm expanding, people around the world think to themselves, if Felicia Langer is petitioning the Israeli High Court of Justice, it means probably that she believes that there is justice in the Israeli High Court of Justice. And of course, if that's around the world, but even more so internally in Israel. Professor David Kretschmer, a famous Israeli constitutional law professor, he was my professor in the Hebrew University many years ago. He wrote a book called The Occupation of Justice. And he ends the book, and it deals with the role of the Israeli court in koshering different illegal practices and distorting international law for that. And he ended his book by saying that maybe if the court would have not dealt with these questions, if it would decline to deal with cases that have to do with the deeds of the Israeli authorities outside the borders of sovereign Israel, like the American Supreme Court has done for many years until Guantanamo, basically. That's why the people of Guantanamo, the prisoners were put in Guantanamo thinking that the Constitution does not apply. It's outside America. If the court would decline to deal with these issues, maybe Israeli elites that sleep well at night because they know there are these wise, mostly men, close to 70 years old on a hill in Jerusalem, that are making sure that things are not going crazy, that maybe if these elites would not feel so secure that there are wise judges in Jerusalem that take care of things, maybe they would uprise against the continuation of the occupation. Now, this maybe thing is problematic. First, we don't have an alternative reality in which there are no litigation in the Israeli Supreme Court to see what would have happened if. We don't have, we can't give placebo to one client and a real litigation to another and check what would be the difference. It's not possible. And more important than that, Palestinians keep asking Israeli lawyers to represent them. And I think that is the most important thing at the end of the day. At the end of the day, those who are under occupation, those who are under the boot of oppression, they feel that, small as the chance may be that they will get relief from the court of the abuser, small as it may be, it's more than zero, and it's more than other options that they have, if they have at all. And they are ready to take this chance. And they are less concerned with the question of legitimization. And I'll end with saying that my understanding and my analysis is that during the days when Felicia Langer left the profession and slammed the door, the issue of legitimization was much more acute, because the Israeli Supreme Court has enjoyed a very, very high and good reputation in the West. Very. If you look at professional essays that were written in the 80s and the end of the 80s in very respectable legal periodicals, you'll see that the Israeli court was hailed as an example of an activist court that protects individual rights, even in a non-democratic regime like the occupation. These were completely biased and distorted, and sometimes doctored essays. But it did represent a sentiment that was very, very much popular. The Israeli court was really one of the most, a rising star. This is not the case today. This is not the case. Human rights lawyers and human rights organizations that go to the Israeli court, first of all, in parallel, are saying what they think about the court and the Israeli justice system. So no one can mistake that they think they'll get justice. They know that it's like going to the wardens of your prison and with emotion. So first of all, we learned from this. We are saying what we think about this system in parallel when we go to that system. That's one. Second, this system does not enjoy anymore, I think, the same high reputation and good name that it had 30 and 40 years ago. So the question of legitimization became much less acute today. The question of whether we're going to harm the cause is still there and still has to be taken into account in every strategy we embark on, a legal strategy we embark on in cases that we take on. So that was, I think, very theoretical and quite academic. I'm sorry, but that's what I was asked to. I'll stop here because more than a half hour of me talking has passed.
No, y es muy interesante.
It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Really interesting. I hope everyone agrees. The fact was, it was fantastic. And I think the last thing you said brings us up to today, because in the world after October 7th, the issue of the judicial reform was a subject that brought a lot of people into the streets throughout the world, and I think that also, as an Israeli, from Israel, it was seen differently, as you well explained. It didn't bring a right like we expected. Could you give us your vision of the judicial reform, how it changed since it started, and perhaps your more critical view And I have a second question, which is
Si toda la temática que hablaste,
if the
cómo lo
whole
han visto
issue
estos
that
2
you
últimos
mentioned,
años.
well,
Entonces, dijiste que
that you
había
were
menos
discussing
dilemas
how you
porque ya hay
experienced
cosas
this
que eran
over the
menos
last 2 years.
legítimas,
You said there
pero
were
también
less
si
dilemmas
hay
because there
brecha
were
de
things that were
funcionar,
uh,
si hay poder de
less
cambio
legitimate
o
things.
que
If there
se limitó
is
el
a,
poder de cambio.
wait, hold on.
Lo último era, podemos también pregunta por pregunta, también si
The
se
second
entiende
question
que en
was,
estos 2
I
últimos
understand
años, en
that
los
over the
últimos
last 2
tiempos,
years and
como el
in recent
sistema es
years,
menos
as the system
legítimo,
is
entonces hay menos
less
miedo de
legitimate, so
legitimizarlo.
there's less fear of
Pero también si
legitimizing it.
hay
But
menos posibilidades de
perhaps
cambio,
there are less
dentro
possibilities
del
for
sistema y
changing
donde se
within
va
the
realmente
system,
reduciendo
as
el poder
since
de cambio.
the possibility for change is really being reduced.
I'll start with your second question because it presents a paradox. And the paradox is the more there is a chance of winning in that system, the more probably that system has good reputation and the legitimization danger is higher. Okay? The more you have chance of getting results in that system, that means that that system is independent and professional and is ready to go in frontal criticism of the executive. And if that is the character of that system, it is there's good chance that that system will be a system that enjoys very good reputation. And then going to that system the legitimization factor would be stronger. So yeah, I mean, that's why I started with saying if we wouldn't win in Berlin or in any other case, then there would be no dilemma. The dilemma is when you can get results. And then you have to say, well, you know, I want to win, but I don't want to give them the credit that they've done a good job, right? And that's exactly the paradox. And yes, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. We have seen a massive change in the character of our judiciary when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the last decade and a half, the Israeli right has focused on the Supreme Court, not only the Supreme Court, the District Court in Jerusalem, that are both very important instances for West Bank issues and East Jerusalem. And so we've seen, and there was a generational change in the Supreme Court. So many judges retired and there were many appointments made. And so the Israeli far right, that was in power for the last 15 years, has nominated many like-minded judges to the Supreme Court. When I say the Israeli right, I don't mean the current populist, Bibiist, Kahanist right. I'm talking about the extreme nationalistic right that is supposedly still believes in separation of powers and all that thing. And so we had a court 20 years ago with a vast majority of judges, and pay attention well to how I define it, judges who perceive themselves as liberals. That if you would ask them, they would define themselves as liberals. It's important how a person defines him or herself. I wouldn't call them liberals, but they call themselves liberals, and it's important. And today, the judges in the Supreme Court that calls themselves liberals are a minority. So that's one change that the Israeli judiciary has went through. The second change is the judicial overhaul. The judicial overhaul, which is an attack, a frontal attack on the judiciary, and in a moment I'll say in what way, created a situation in which the court has to defend itself. And in defending itself, it also strikes alliances with sections of the Israeli society that defend the court. And now the court, you know, I have instructed my associates, the lawyers that work in my office, since last month, in every petition in which we represent Palestinians, in the opening, to end the opening part of the petition with a paragraph saying that in these days, giving remedy to Palestinians is philanthropy for judges. You don't get anything in return, only problems. And this is exactly what happened. The judicial overhaul created a situation in which providing remedy for Palestinians only empowers the spins, the lies, the incitement against the judiciary as if it is a pro-Palestinian court. So even the small number of cases in which we got remedy for, you know, against abuse of Palestinian rights are now diminished. The first casualty of the judicial overhaul are the Palestinians under occupation. So those two developments, the change in the character of the judges and the judicial overhaul, brought about a legal reality in which it is extremely difficult to get anything when you represent Palestinians in the Israeli court. Not nothing, by the way. I mean, the judges also understand, I'm not saying that that it is in their awareness, but somehow in the back of their minds, the psychology of that institution, they understand that if there is no remedy at all, there will be no petitions. The Israeli court would not be, there would be no Palestinians going to court. And they don't want that. So there is a certain amount of price that has to be paid in order to be presenting itself. The court wants to present itself as a court where everyone can petition and everyone gets justice. In order to actually do it, they need to have a few cases a year in which they provide a remedy. Now, the judicial overhaul is basically a Putinist type of process of galvanizing power with the executive, not even the executive, the leader. Because Israel's so-called democracy or democratic structure is a very shallow one in democratic terms anyway, even without the occupation. It has almost no gatekeepers who have actual power to balance the power of the executive. The parliament is very weak, extremely weak, because it is dominated by the ruling coalition. The ruling coalition is dominated completely by the heads of the parties, because the parties dominate the members of the parties, the members of parliament. We don't have a system in which part of the members are being elected by local communities. So all the alliance and all the loyalty of members of parliament are to the party and not to a constituency, because the question of whether they will continue to be members of parliament depends on the party, not on the constituency. And so we have several men, it's always men, that form a coalition, and they dominate the government and they dominate the parliament. And so the only real gatekeeper that we have is the legal system, is the judiciary. And the judicial overhaul is all about stripping the judiciary of its powers to intervene in the decisions and the policies and the acts of the main power, which is the government, the executive. But also the power of the parliament, which again, in some way, the power of the parliament is the power of the executive because it controls the parliament. And so if the judicial overhaul succeeds, all the democratic features, I'm not calling Israel a democracy. I cannot call a country that controls and oppresses millions of people for generations a democracy. I mean, unless we're taking the standard of ancient Athens, where you have 300,000 citizens and 2 million slaves. So for me, Israel is not a democracy, but Israel does have democratic features. And that's different. It has democratic features. It has freedom of the press is a value, a real value in Israel. And freedom of speech is a real value in Israel. It is all being attacked and all being ignored in the last decade. But these are real things. It's not as if. And Israel does have a separation of powers. And I mean, between the judiciary and other. And Israel does have a court that is professional and independent. And there are safeguards in Israeli law to make sure that this independence will be maintained. So if we peel off these features, pluralism in arts and the academy, all of these things are being now under attack. If we peel all of that, then we have a totalitarian or authoritarian regime. And for many friends of mine in the circles that I come from, going to fight to save the court, that is the court that allowed so many atrocities to be inflicted on Palestinians, were too much for them. They wouldn't go to these demonstrations. It's not only because they're not ready to protect the court that they have such a, we say in Hebrew, maybe also in English or Spanish, we have a full belly of complaints against the court. So they wouldn't, but it's not only that. It's also the feeling that the hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions that took to the Israelis, who took to the streets to fight against this process. For many of my friends, that was an exemplar of cynicism. You're going out to fight only when it comes to your rights. 15 minutes away from Kaplan, the main street where these rallies are taking place, 15 minutes from Kaplan, there is a system of when there are no traffic jams. Okay, if there are traffic jams, it's more than 15 minutes. 15 minutes from there, there is a different planet where everything you fight against is already there. And you, the people that are gathering in the streets of Tel Aviv, fighting for democracy, you are the ones who are responsible, many of you, to maintain that non-democratic, dictatorial, military regime. So many of my friends wouldn't want to stand with these people. I have to say I did go. I did go to these rallies because I felt that when people fight for democratic values, that is something that I need to stand with them. I felt that by going to these rallies, we are able to, sorry for the very, it will sound a little paternalistic, but to educate. And actually, I have somewhere here, I wrote a book recently. Unfortunately, meanwhile, it's only in Hebrew. It's called Occupation from Within, a journey to the sources of the constitutional coup, the judicial overhaul, in which this is a book that was written for those who go to demonstrate against the judicial overhaul. And what I'm telling them, that with all my sympathy to this cause, you need to understand where it comes from. How come we have one day woke up and saw that this is what is going on? And the fact that we are, and I tried to connect the judicial overhaul with the issue of the endless occupation and apartheid that we're inflicting. That was, I actually submitted the manuscript in September of 2023. So then October came, and I thought I'll never, it is not relevant anymore. And it took me another 8 months going back to the text and updating it, and eventually it did come out. So my personal attitude to the protests against the judicial overhaul is nuanced. I think that when people fight for their rights, it's fine. People should fight for their rights. It's not a bad thing. People usually fight for their rights. And when they fight for democratic values, it's great, but it's an opportunity and a window in which we should try to widen their scope about occupation and bring in the issue of democracy, and bring in the issue of the occupation into the mix. It was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Fine.
No, está perfecto.
No,
Pero
it was
estoy como
perfect.
segura que es todo tan interesante que la gente tiene muchas
It's
preguntas para
everything is so
hacer.
interesting. I'm sure people have a
Entonces
lot
le
of
paso
questions.
a
So
Jonas Benaguch,
let me give the floor to
manejar
Jonas
la parte de
Ben
preguntas
Arroch,
y
who
respuestas.
will
Así
moderate
que
the
quien quiere
question and answer
preguntar algo
session. So
puede
anyone who wants to
levantar su
ask
mano
a question
virtual
can raise their hand virtually,
y hacer preguntas. Y
and
si
you can
no,
ask any
Jonas y yo
questions.
tenemos varias, así que...
And so Jonas and I have a lot more. Michael, I'm so appreciative for this enlightening talk about your work as a human rights defender in a state that doesn't want to defend Palestinian rights too much. We have the complexity of the struggle that you're carrying out. But I wanted to ask you about the current situation of the Palestinians that you are defending, both in the West Bank and in the Palestinians from 1948, the Israeli Palestinian citizens. We know a lot more about what's going on in West Bank. We get some news, but I know much less about what happened to the 48 Palestinians. And I was wondering if you could go into this in greater detail.
Sure. Yeah, I think we have, for those who are not versed with the Israeli population statistics, there are 10 million Israelis, Israeli nationals. About 20% of them, around 2 million, are Palestinians. And this is a very, very discriminated against minority. In fact, while in the Israeli books, there are very small number of laws that are actually blatantly discriminatory, like the law of return, which allows only Jews to be nationalized and get the Israeli citizenship automatically. And there are several laws that are discriminatory. In general, the Israeli law book is not discriminatory. So if someone would come from Mars and only read the Israeli law books, they wouldn't say that this is a system, an apartheid system, for example. But the detail lies in policies and in practices, and in the fact that the Israeli elite, which is Jewish, in all aspects of elite: economical elite, political elite, military elite, artistic, and so on. There are systems in place to make sure that centers of power will remain at the hands of Jews. And that is the feature of a type of governance that my good friend Professor Oren Iftachel called and coined the term ethnocracy. Ethnocracy means something that looks like democracy, but in fact it has a system of policies and practices that makes sure that only one ethnicity will be in charge. And that is how the state of Israel operates, and it was always like that. And but there were times when the situation of Palestinians, citizens of Israel, was getting better, and definitely in the last decade, this trend has overturned, and they are seen more and more as traitors by the Israeli leadership. And especially the Israeli government is very much concerned about their political power. So the main thing that I want to say, there's a lot to say about their situation, including how they were completely deserted when it comes to law enforcement. The Israeli Kahanist minister that is in charge of the police allows crime gangs to operate almost freely in Palestinian towns. And so we've seen the highest rate of murders in the Palestinian sector ever we have ever had, more than 200 murders a year. Almost every day someone is being murdered in Palestinian cities and towns. But what I want to highlight and flag, because this will be very important in the coming year, is the issue of their political representation. The political representation of Palestinians with Israeli nationality was always the alibi for Israel. We can't be we can't be an apartheid if they have the right to vote and to be elected, and we even have a Supreme Court judge who's a Palestinian. Well, the reality is different. The reality is that just like with the law, but I said there aren't many laws that are blatantly discriminatory, but there are practices. The same goes when it comes to their political power. Their political power is being diluted and delegitimized. What I sense that we're going to see in the coming year, which is going to be an election year in Israel, we're going to see huge amounts of political violence that is meant to suppress the voting patterns and the extent of votes of Palestinian citizens who are voting, in order to reduce the number of Palestinians with Israeli citizenship that are voting in the elections. Because for Netanyahu, it is clear if Palestinians will be voting at the high rate, he has no chance of winning, absolutely no chance. But if he can suppress it, then he has a chance. That's one. Second, for the first time in Israel's history, there's a real danger that a central list, political list, that represents mainly Palestinian voters will not only be disqualified by the Central Election Committee, which is a political body, that happened many times, but it will also not be reinstated by the Supreme Court. So we already had several times when political Palestinian parties were disqualified to run in the election by the Central Election Committee, but the Israeli Supreme Court has overruled that decision and reinstated those lists. It's the first time that there is a real chance that the court would not do it with a certain list, with Balad. And that would, because of all the things that I said about the changes in the Israeli court. that would put in a bind, if it will happen, that would present a huge dilemma for the other Palestinian parties, especially Hadash, the former communist party. Because will they participate in the election and enjoy the fact that their brothers and sisters from the competing party have been disqualified? Or do they boycott the elections? So these are things that we're going to see in coming year. A lot of violence in the streets, real violence, suppression of vote, all kinds of laws that will be introduced to frighten and intimidate Palestinian voters, cameras, all kinds of things, and disqualification of either lists or specific candidates on all kinds of bogus charges.
Gracias, Mijael.
Thank you, Mijael. We have a question from Yoav. Thank you. First, I want to thank Michael. What you've said has been extremely interesting. And my question would be, in light of what's going on today, everything that you mentioned in the government and the judicial system, perhaps this female lawyer, I don't recall her name, who left everything and burned her files and left, perhaps she did what was correct. And she had a vision of the future of where we're going, just like Professor Leibovich, who was looking at this since 1967. I wanted to lay out this question. It's a dilemma, as you already said, but it would seem to me that right now, the situation is perhaps deserving of this. We've seen this after what happened on October 7th. No one resigned. The head of the army, the minister of the defense, everyone continued because perhaps there is some merit in continuing, but there comes a time where you say no longer. That would be my question. What does Michael think now?
So thank you for this very important question. There's one value that I haven't mentioned yet when it comes to the process of thinking of the right answer to your question. And that is the sanctity of the individual. Let's assume that I can't, through litigation, through the work that I do, bring an end to the occupation. And I can't even contribute to that. Of course, I can't bring an end. It will not end by litigation, but I cannot contribute to that. Whatever I do doesn't help. But I can get remedy for one man. One man. המציל נפש אחת, כאילו הציל עולם ומלואו. And I think it's not by chance that Felicia Langer was a communist and got this decision. I think it's not by chance that the lawyer who decided to burn her archive and leave was a communist. Because for her, the question of sacrificing the individuals who could have enjoyed some remedy if she would stay was less important than the question of the overall struggle, of the cause. And I have a lot of sympathy for socialism. I'm not against communism. I mean, I'm not a communist, but I'm first and foremost a believer in the philosophy of humanism, of human rights. And so I am not able to sacrifice the individual on the greater good, and especially when it is speculative. So that's my answer. It's not, it's a legitimate, I think an opposite view is legitimate. And I'm a lawyer. Usually I don't think that the opposite position is legitimate. When I go to court, I think that my adversaries are presenting an evil and illegitimate position. But in this case, it's a fair quandary.
Thank you.
Only recently, I managed, my office and me including, we managed to issue restraining orders against 3 different very violent settlers who were terrorizing the lives of very small nomadic communities in the Jordan Valley. And because of these orders, those 3 individuals has stopped their daily raids on these communities. Did it bring the occupation anywhere closer to end? It didn't. But my clients can sleep at night, better at least.
Okay.
Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, Mijal, ¿tú querías preguntar algo?
Michal, you had another question
Antes
you wanted
veo
to?
que todos pregunten y después
I prefer,
a mí en lo personal
personally,
me interesó cómo
I was interested
esto que
in
tiene que ver con
how
todo lo que se habló.
it has,
Viviste, yo
how
te leí
you,
en Haaretz
I read
y
in Haaretz, I read
cómo
something
viviste
you wrote,
estos 2 años
how you've experienced
ahí.
these
Creo
last 2
que
years
para cualquiera
being
que
there.
es de
I think for
izquierda
anyone who has
es una
leftist
situación muy
leanings,
difícil
it's a very difficult
de
situation
convivir y
to
también el poder
experience
cambiar, ¿no?
and to be able
Como
to
activistas
change.
siempre queremos cambiar y
We as
somos
activists
muy
always
agonitas,
want to
muy
change.
mosquititas en este momento.
And
Más como pregunta emocional, no como
it's
pregunta
like, and this is more an emotional question rather than an intellectual one.
Look, I had fun not talking about the last 2 years up till now. The last 2 years were devastating. What you read, the opinion essay that I wrote and you read, was the most difficult text that I ever wrote. Emotionally, I'd never thought that I would call the society I live in a crime family, and this is what I think of of the Israeli society. I think that Israel has engaged in the most horrific war crimes and crimes against humanity, and I think that if Raphael Lemkin, the Polish Jewish jurist who coined the term genocide, I think if he would live today, he would also say that Israel has committed the crime of genocide against the people of Gaza. That is not to say that I think that in modern day definition of the crime of genocide, it will be very difficult to prove it, but I am sure that the original definition of the crime of genocide applies. And I'm afraid that these atrocities have not been committed by a government that snatched the state of Israel, that kidnapped the state of Israel, that did something that the Israeli society did not want to do. I think that was the starvation, the mass transfer of people, the targeting of civilian infrastructure, the complete annihilation of domestic residential areas, the the annihilation of the education system, the health system in Gaza. All of this was an all-Israeli project, an all-Israeli project. And what I wrote in that op-ed is that it's easiest to look at Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and, and say, this is not us. But the fact of the matter is that I am a member of a bar association that called for the arrest of the Minister of Justice because he locked the doors of the office that is used by the Attorney General and not allow her to go in. But that same bar association would not say a word about the fact that we are starving people. We're not allowing humanitarian aid, food, and medicine to go in as a policy, as a means of warfare. That bar association has not been willing to say a word about the fact that Israel for 2 years is not allowing the Red Cross to visit Palestinians in Israeli prisons that became torture camps in which 80 people were killed in the last 2 years. So, and the same I can say about the other labor unions, of the teachers and doctors, the Israeli Medical Association. No one has said a word about what is happening. And Israel as a society was saturated in genocidal incitement that was heard everywhere. I myself, I was a frequent interviewee in Israeli national media because of my expertise in international law and because of my cases. I haven't been once to the Israeli TV since October. I was once when I wrote a very very strong piece against the media. So they invited me to talk about themselves. But the voice that I present to you now, that you hear from me now, is completely absent in the Israeli media since October 7th. Gideon Levy, who was the Haaretz well-known publicist, who was a permanent member of a panel in Channel 13, was expelled from that panel, basically. So the Israeli media has not provided neither, the two callings of journalists, of media enterprises. One is to bring the facts to the people so that they can, and the second is to bring the array of opinions. And those two were betrayed by the Israeli media. The Israeli media has sealed and prevented the Israeli public from seeing Palestinian Gazan suffering completely. They got it from all the sources, and they've decided, all of them, not to show it to the Israeli public, not to show hunger, not to show suffering, not to show amputated kids, not to show the bodies of babies, not to show women who are in the verge of death, not to show all of that. And second, they wouldn't allow people like me and to present our position in this city hall that is the studios of the national television channels. So just ending my answer, I would say that it's for the first time. Never in my wildest dreams would have imagined that the society I'm in would be doing these kind of atrocities. And I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would be calling on sanctions to be imposed on the Israeli society, on boycotts and international investigations to be launched. I never thought. I'm not a member of this progressive international left camp that thinks that Israel is a colonialist enterprise that shouldn't exist. I'm not. Sorry.
Tampoco. No, yo tampoco. Bueno, Para finalizar,
Well, to
me
conclude,
parece- perdón,
uh,
Paula. Sí.
hold on, Paula, you have a question.
Sí, hola.
Hi,
Perdone, muchas
excuse
gracias.
me.
Mi nombre es Paula
Thank
Adam.
you.
Yo es la
My
primera
name
vez
is
que
Paula
participo
Adam. This is the
este
first time
grupo.
that I participate in
Estoy
this
muy
group.
agradecida
I
por
am
esta
extremely
organización,
appreciative
muy
for
agradecida
this
a Michael
event.
por la
I
presentación.
really
Yo tengo
appreciate
una
Michael's
duda que me persigue
presentation.
desde
I
hace
have a
mucho
doubt
tiempo y
which
ahora
has been pursuing me for a long time,
me viene otra vez.
and now it occurred to me again.
Michael, tú has dicho que pasarán,
You
que
said,
habrá
Mike, that
tiempos muy duros en Israel, políticamente
difficult times
hablando,
are coming,
comentando
politically
lo
speaking,
del
for Israel.
grupo
You
político palestino,
mentioned
que la
for
Corte
Palestinian
Suprema
political
podría
groups
por
and that
primera
the
vez aceptar que no
Supreme
se pueden
Court
presentar, etcétera.
might
A ver, yo, mi pregunta
accept
es,
their banning from election participation.
entiendo que
My question would be,
cuando dice que habrá mucha tensión en
when you say
Israel,
there's
es
going to be a
porque hay
lot of
una masa
tension in Israel,
crítica
is that because there's a critical
que
mass
apoya esta visión
that
o
supports this
por otro
vision?
lado también estás
Or on the
diciendo
other
que no
hand,
hay
are
esa
you
masa
saying that
crítica,
that critical mass
o sea,
doesn't
me
exist?
gustaría saber si
What
hay
I
alguna
would like to
esperanza
know
de
is
una
if there's
mínima
any
masa
hope
crítica en
for
el
a
sentido
minimum
de
critical
reconocimiento de
mass
un
in the sense of the
genocidio internamente,
recognition
algún
of
grupo
genocide internally.
canal de
If
nivel de
there's any
prensa, ¿no? Cuando ha dicho que
channel in the
había
press, when
libertad
you
de
said
prensa, ¿no? Que esté
that there is
reportando
freedom of
periódicamente
press,
sobre el genocidio
that
o
they
esa o
are they
este mensaje no
periodically
está llegando
reporting on the
internamente.
genocide, or is this
Esto
message
por un
not
lado. Y
getting
por
through
otro
internally? That's
lado,
on the one
una
hand.
pregunta
And
un poco
secondly, I
naif,
have
pero
perhaps a
¿qué
naive
quisieras
question,
tú
but
que
what
sucediera a
would
nivel
you like
mundial
to
para que
happen
tuvierais
worldwide
soporte, gente
to
como
get
tú,
support?
para
People like you could get support
desmantelar este
to
sistema de apartheid? O sea,
dismantle
¿qué
this
tendría que
apartheid
pasar para que
system. What
vosotros
would have
desde
to
dentro,
happen
la
so
lucha que hacéis
that
desde dentro
your
fuera
struggle from
apoyada
inside could be
por
supported
por algo que pase desde fuera o por
from
encima?
something on the
No sé
outside?
si me he hecho explicar.
I don't know if I was
Gracias.
clear in my question.
You
Thank
are,
you.
you are completely clear. Your first question, though, mixes two things. One is whether there is a critical mass in the Israeli society that would counter the current government and its aspiration to keep in power and to suppress Palestinian with Israeli citizenship from voting. I think there is. I think since October 7th, we've seen there was not a single poll since October 7th in which the current coalition wins the majority. It declined in power and in popularity considerably. And although there was some rise in their polling in recent months, they're still not even close to get 61 seats, which is the number you need for a majority. They're around 50. So the amount of the number of people in Israel today that would like this government to go away is a majority. It's a steady majority. It's an obvious majority. But Ben Gvir gave away 200,000 guns. And I didn't get one. I didn't ask for one. The militias of the right are being created in the last 2 years in different ways. So scenes like January 6th in DC could be seen in Israel, and fights between citizens, internal fights, could be a vision that is not something that is far-fetched. So the question is not only minority versus majority. The question is also, what are the populists that, look, the current coalition is made of three parts: populists, which are BBists, those who see Bibi as the new messiah; the settlers, who are not populists. They have an ideology, a devilish ideology, but an ideology; and the ultra-Orthodox. And these are the partners in the current coalition. And the settlers and the BBists are ready to do things. Some of the settlers, some of the BBists are ready to engage in violence. So that's when it comes to, and I said you mix two things. The other thing about genocide In this case, we're not close. I mean, it's a small fraction of a minority that is willing to say that Israel engaged in genocide. If tomorrow the bill that criminalizes complaints to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court, would be brought to the Knesset, there is a bill. It's not yet a law. It's a bill that if I file a complaint to the ICC, that would be a criminal offense. If that will be brought to the Knesset tomorrow, 90 members of parliament will vote in favor of this. Maybe more, maybe 95 out of 120. So we're not even close to the recognition that we've done something wrong. But look, these things can happen very quickly. If we look at history and we look at, who was in the resistance, once the resistance wins, suddenly everybody says that they were always against the regime, right? They were in the resistance. So it can happen quite quickly. As for your second question, a lasting solution and a lasting peace, a lasting model in which all people between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea will have membership in a political entity that provides them with the ability to express their talents and to influence their future through civil and political rights, may it be one state or two states or a confederation. I'm a member of a Land for All. A Land for All is an initiative that promotes a confederative model for a solution between Israel and Palestine. For these kind of things to happen, there would need to be big pressure from inside and big pressure from outside. It will not happen only because there's big pressure from outside. It will not happen because there is enough pressure from the inside. It will happen in a combination of both. The more Israel will be pressured from the outside, the more our voices from the inside will be amplified. When European leaders are very harsh on Israel, and then they sign treaties with it, when the German chancellor is saying very, very good things about why Israel should not do and this and that, and why it has to re-examine its arms sales to Israel. And then today we hear that they strike a deal of more than $1 billion to sell arms to Israel. That gives Israelis the feeling that it's all talk and everybody is with us. The West is with us. We need credible pressure to be imposed on Israel, because the occupation is not an internal Israeli affair, and the destruction of Gaza is not an internal Israeli affair. It's an international affair. And Israel cannot do whatever it wants. Once such pressure is mounted, then our voices from within will be more heard.
Well, we're running up against the time limits we had agreed. On behalf of all the members of ZMAN EMET, I really want to thank from the bottom of my heart Michael Sfard for this immersion that he has shared with us. It has been a devastating analysis of the situation. We agree with you. At least J. Cole Spain is in agreement with you on the importance of outside pressure. We do believe that there is a time for outside pressure
Nos lo has
Um,
confirmado tú, pero
uh,
ya lo venimos sabiendo
you
desde
could
que
confirm
fuiste
this, but
vicepresidente
we
en
knew
las
from a
posibilidades
long
de cambio.
going back
Y
that there
también
wasn't
donde
much
somos de algún
time,
modo
what
el
possibilities of
sitio
getting
en
change
que
just
era para todos,
from
que
the
era
inside.
for all, dos estados, una patria. Nos
We
parece una iniciativa formidable. Además,
we think the idea
revolucionaria,
of
porque
one
el
homeland,
Estado
two
palestino
states is a
ha pegado
fantastic
muchísimos estados
initiative.
nacionales. Entonces creemos que
We
es una
believe
iniciativa
that
que hay que tener más en cuenta.
this
Y os
we
apoyamos
are aware of a
en
land
todo
for
lo que
all is a
hacemos.
very good initiative.
No sé si me hace falta decir algo más.
I don't know if I need to
Veo
say
5
anything
mensajes nuevos,
further.
que no sé si es alguien
I
que tiene
see
una
5
pregunta.
new messages.
Bueno,
I don't know if
muchos
anyone has a last
agradecimientos a
question.
Mijael,
So
evidentemente, porque
these are
ha sido
all
espléndida esta
thanks to
charla.
Michael. His presentation was
Nada,
absolutely
deciros
splendid.
que
And let me just say
muchas gracias a todos, muchas gracias por todo lo que
thank you
haces,
very
Mijael, de
much.
verdad, ha sido
Thank you,
fantástico, ha
Michael.
sido
True, it has been
triste
fantastic.
y esclarecedor, pero
It's been
ya solo por el
very
hecho de que es
enlightening and very
esclarecedor
sad.
ya tiene un punto de
Just for the
alegría, ¿no?
fact that it was enlightening makes it a happy occasion.
Bueno, por mi parte,
And
nada más.
and
Y
that
también
would
optimista al final.
well, in the end, he was a little optimistic.
Sí.
I will quote my grandfather. My grandfather was a famous sociologist, Zygmunt Bauman, and he said, when he was asked if he's optimist, he said, "I'm a pessimist for the short term and an optimist for the longer term." So I subscribe to that. I am a pessimist for the short term, but I'm an optimist for the long term. And I want to thank you all. And next time we'll do it in Barcelona.
Amén.
Amen.